I think the record is in place. So, yeah, I'd like to start the ball rolling. I'm Warren Wheelock. I serve on the board of the WVAIA, the Waterville Valley Athletic Improvement Association. Hey, we're really excited about this collaboration with Squam Lake Association. And this is the first of our winter outdoor recreation speaker series. So, you know, in addition to today's presentation, I'll give a small plug. We have two additional events. One that will be on February 17th, a behind the scenes look at the Waterville Valley Guidebook. And that'll speakers being Steve Smith, author and owner of the Mountain Wanderer in Lincoln, as well as Brenda and Preston Conglin, local avid hikers and historians, and Dan Newton, Waterville Recreation Guide, as well as AIA board member. And then for our third series, which will be on March 24th, Over the Mountain and the Trails That Connect Us. And at that time, we'll have a speaker, Katri Gurney, who is the SLA Trails and Access Manager, as well as a trail expert from AIA to be announced at a later time. I do want to give a really special thanks to Squam Lake Association, and most especially to Leanne Reynolds, the Director of Education. She's put in a lot of legwork for organizing these series, done a most excellent job putting together the publicity, and not to mention organizing the Zoom sessions that we're doing right now. So big thank you. And Leanne had already mentioned earlier, but just a few reminders about the Zoom etiquette. You're all welcome to leave your video on or off as you wish. And the meeting is being recorded. Hopefully people that missed tonight can then listen in at a later time. And if you have questions, we'd like to address them all at the end of the session, and then you can enter your questions into the chat dialogue box at any time. So without further delay, I'd like to pass the baton on to Leanne and let her continue with tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Warren. So both of tonight's presenters grew up exploring the woods and lakes of New Hampshire, and as adults, they both landed jobs that allowed them to pursue their passion for the outdoors, and going out on adventures and exploring. So to kick off tonight, Erick Amero, the Waterville Valley Recreation Department Adventure Program Manager, is going to share some tips on how to stay safe while exploring the trails this winter. And then Tyson Morrill, the Squam Lakes Association Director of Conservation, is going to discuss ice safety. If you're like me and you don't want to forget your question, feel free to use the chat and type in your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end. And then I also will be entering links while Erick and Tyson are presenting. So things that they mentioned during their presentations and refer to, I'll throw those into the chat as well. And then if you have resources that you really love, feel free to share those. And I'm going to create a resource page that I'll then share with everyone who's here tonight, as well as post it onto the SLA website. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Erick.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining. Should be a lot of fun. Zoom is always kind of a challenge. I definitely feed off of people's questions and interactions, so it's a little bit different this way. But definitely, write down your questions, your comments, your thoughts. And when we get towards the end, I'm probably going to be rambling on for about 30-ish minutes or so, but stick around. As boring as it may be with me, you got the big show with Tyson after me, so stick through it, and we'll get to the fun stuff later. But yeah, tonight I'm just gonna bring up the slideshow here. We're gonna talk about different considerations when you're doing activities outdoors in the wintertime. You know, whether it's, you know, an hour or two outdoors, just kind of doing a nature walk, whether you're doing Morgan and Percival or whether you're going up to the presidentials, there's some fundamental safety things that, that everyone should be aware of and consider every time you go out. So we're going to kind of go over some winter weather. We have some real interesting, fascinating weather here in the wintertime year round, but especially up in the presidentials. We'll talk about heat loss and production. How do we lose heat? How do we make heat? How do we retain heat? Different types of food, the importance of hydration, equipment. Usually I do a similar talk pretty much every week, and gear tends to be the major question. So, so we'll do a little bit of that. The layering system, different safety equipment and considerations, and then a few tips and tricks. So these few photos here are from of Mount Washington in the wintertime. And if you haven't been up there in the wintertime or the surrounding presidentials, it is a different planet. It is absolutely incredible. There's no big surprise as to why so many mountaineers train up there in the wintertime to get ready for huge mountains such as K2 or Everest. It really does have some of the worst weather in the world. A big part of that is the location of the mountains, how the prevailing winds and storms are funneled right through the presidentials, and especially Washington, and especially just that wind. It's absolutely epic up there at times. So again, some of the benefits, the thing that I really love about anything outdoors in the wintertime, whether it's snowshoeing or a nature walk or backcountry skiing or what have you, the woods in the wintertime in New England is just a different place. There's trails here that, you know, I'll do probably a dozen times in the warmer weather, but it's completely different in the wintertime. The woods are more quiet. Most of the songbirds are gone. The insects are gone. You know, some of the tourists are still kicking around, but you know, it's a completely different environment. And I just think it's that solitude is just has a huge impact. It's a different environment. So that's, you know, some of the great benefits, and we all have our reasons for being out there, or maybe our reasons if you haven't gone out and been able to enjoy the outdoors in the wintertime. You might be attracted to some of those reasons. But with that is also an understanding of some of the risks that are inherent with any outdoor activity in the wintertime. The temperature, of course, is colder. It's the wintertime. But the temperature can change quite a bit. It's not just the environment temperature, but it's also taking care of our body temperatures while we're out there and staying warm and healthy. Snow depth. So, you know, just before Christmas, we had a pretty epic snowstorm, and where I live in New Hampton, we got 28 inches, maybe a little bit more of snow. And I had a guided hike the next day, and I was petrified that I was going to be breaking trail in that kind of snow. So, you know, the snow depth is definitely a consideration, both for where you're going, but also for the parking lots, some of the roads, you know, like Triple I Road here in Waterville Valley is closed. So you certainly need to consider where the trailhead is and be knowledgeable about what roads in New Hampshire are going to be locked and gated by the Forest Service. Also ice, that can really slow down your progress on the trail. It can make ascending going up or descending going down a trail even more, you know, a bit dangerous because of those slippery trail conditions, and you may need some specialized equipment to help with that. But also ice on the road. So making sure you're aware of the weather forecast for home and then along your route to get to your hiking destination. It's rare that the conditions at home are going to be what they are in the mountains and where you're going to be hiking. So be aware of the ice, be aware of road conditions, closed roads and trailheads. So like on the Kankamankas, there's plenty of these little kind of pull-ins where, it has just enough for a few cars, those aren't plowed out in the wintertime. So, making sure you're doing your homework, looking at those trail descriptions, knowing where you can park and where you're not going to be able to park, because there are plenty of places you're welcome to hike, but you won't be able to have much of a parking spot. Wind is probably one of the biggest considerations, especially when you get above tree line. So, we have different types of forest ecosystems, and as you go higher, it noticeably changes till you get to a point where you're above tree line or the alpine zone. Those trees are stunted by the wind and the lack of soil and the rocky conditions. You have trees that are called cromults, so they basically bonsai, and you can have trees that are hundreds of years old, but they're about waist high. And when you're in that area, typically about 4,000 feet, you're really open to the elements, especially the wind. And as we're going to find out in a little bit, that wind is one of the big factors in losing your heat quickly. It's one of the fastest ways that you're going to lose body heat. So just know that, it may be a beautiful sunny day out, but if you have real strong winds, that can slow you down. It can rob you of your energy and your heat. It can make it hard to navigate in. So stream crossings is also kind of a big surprise for a lot of folks who haven't hiked up here in the wintertime. Most of the streams are going to be open and flowing, and you may have wet, icy rocks that you have to cross and navigate. So even in the dead of winter, you're still going to have flowing water, and you need to be prepared for that. And then a lack of sunlight. Since the solstice, we've been getting that sunlight back a little bit each week, but we still don't have a lot of sunlight. So making sure you're aware of your timing, making sure you have a good idea of how long that hike should take you, and factoring in, making sure you have enough daylight to get through your hike. And also mountain shadow is another phenomenon where the sun is setting behind a ridgeline or peak, and it casts a shadow in the area that you're hiking in. So that at times can also make it a bit darker faster than you would expect. All right, so here's a great example of how the snow depth can cover trail markers. I was doing a 5-mile bushwhack last weekend, and you could not follow any of the trail markers. A lot of the trees are just covered. A lot of the spruce and the balsams, the firs were just covered, and they're all bending down and covering up any trail markers. The cairns above tree line can get filled in with snow and covered, so they just look like a big pile of snow. Areas can get filled in with ice and then melt and then refreeze and melt and just build up a thick layer of ice, which can be difficult to navigate and go through. And then the trail signs can be completely covered in snow. We're talking about wind factor, especially above tree line, and that wind chill, that's just compounds the temperature drop. So you can have an ambient temperature without wind, and then you factor in the speed of that wind, and it brings that temperature down. And it can have a very difficult effect with that wind and that freezing, and that wind can really magnify the cold temperature. Pardon me. This chart right here, just kind of quick, but it's kind of interesting. It just shows that any month of the year, you can get snow and cold winter-like temperatures on Washington and some of the surrounding summits like Adams and Jefferson. So just be aware, any time of the year, you can have some really cold temperatures and snow. And Mount Washington typically does get a little bit of snow each month throughout the year. All right. So how do our bodies lose heat? So there's a few different ways that we lose heat. First is the heat loss from direct contact with a cold surface. So, sitting, and this is a picture of my son sitting in the snow. So sitting in the snow on a break or sitting on a rock. So that conduction, your warm body is now heating up that cold surface. So you have that transfer of heat going right into that cold surface. So it's kind of like if you take an ice cube out of your freezer, you put it in your hand is heating up that cold surface, and now you've got a cold hand and a puddle on the floor. So be aware when you're out on a hike, if you sit down or take a break, you want to avoid sitting on cold surfaces or touching cold surfaces. Having liner gloves, things like that can help prevent some of the heat loss through your fingers if you have to touch metal or work with a camera or something like that. All right, and then convection, we're talking about that magnifying force of wind. This is one of the fastest ways that your body loses temperature. So it's from moving water or air, and basically that mass, that cold mass, is moving that heat off of your body, and your body has to keep resupplying it, resupplying heat, and that constant wind just wicks that heat off of your body. And then, pardon me. And we probably all might have seen this when it's a cold day out. I mean, you start hiking or you're pulling a sled up a hill or something like that. You take that hat, your hat off of your head. You get that wavy heat. So our bodies lose heat kind of like a wood stove. So that infrared heat loss is coming off our body, and we lose a lot of that. Pardon me, through our head and our neck. So a good warm hat, scarf, or some kind of neck buff, things like that are great ways to help retain that body heat. It's interesting to think that we lose heat in the wintertime just from breathing. So taking in cold air and then expelling warm, moist air, we lose moisture, we lose heat that way. But of course, our bodies lose heat naturally from sweat and evaporation. So that water on your skin evaporates and it cools our body. That's a natural thing. So our bodies are a bit better adapted for warm weather environments, not so much cold weather environments. So we looked at how we lose body temperature. Now, how do we actually manufacture heat? So there's three ways. The first way is the least effective, most inefficient, which is shivering. So our bodies are not able to do that very efficiently or for very long. There's animals like black-capped chickadee, lots of different birds and animals are able to shiver fairly efficiently to maintain or increase their body temperature, but we can't, not for very long. So then there's two other ways that we can manufacture body heat, which is the first one, which I prefer, and I think is the more fun way, which is eating. So metabolism. When you're on a winter hike, you're burning a lot more calories than you probably realize. Certainly a lot more than most people would in a regular day. So you want to keep eating a lot, good nutritious foods, and then exercise. So our metabolism and then exercise. So food while you're out on a winter activity is how we start a fire in our body. So we talked about exercise, metabolism, to a small degree shivering. So I look at it like a fire, right? So to get that fire going, you need a match, you need a lighter, and that's your simple sugars. So M&Ms, chocolates, things like that, gummies, something with some simple sugars. Our bodies can just get a kind of a jump start from it, would be what starts it off. And then to maintain it throughout the day, you want to be eating some carbs. So granola bars, crackers, things like that could be a good choice. So that's kind of like the kindling. We got that flame going. We got to get some more kindling on there. And then to get that longer lasting heat production and energy, you start looking at proteins and fats, and that's kind of like the logs that you put on the fire to keep it going. It's also really important to note that that dehydration is a real thing in winter activities. It's really easy to get dehydrated because we don't think about it. It's cold out, right? Like you think about it in the summertime, but in the wintertime, you're losing water just from breathing. So you want to make sure that You're drinking plenty of water while you're out on activities, but also dehydration is the gateway to cold weather injuries such as hypothermia, frostbite, frost nip. So you want to make sure that your body's healthy, you're eating nutritious foods. I would suggest, sticking with foods that you're familiar with, lightweight, nutritious, and make sure you're hydrated throughout the activity. So we talked about how our bodies lose heat, how we maintain heat, produce heat, and now we're talking about the layering system, so our clothing system, so we can keep our bodies warm and heated and dry. So the layering system, I think of it like an onion, right? So anytime you cut an onion, anyone who's cut an onion knows that it's just layer upon layer upon layer. And that layering system starts with a base layer, then you have a few different, possibly a few insulation layers on top of that, and possibly an outer layer. So it works basically with 3 systems, and it's very versatile. You need to be able to adapt to the environment and to your physical needs. So your base layer, the main purpose of that is to kind of move that moisture away, to kind of help, one, keep you dry by moving that moisture off of your skin. And by staying dry, it's much easier to stay warm in a cold environment. So your base layer is going to be your thinnest layer. It's right next to your skin, top and bottom. Also consider, like silk weight base layer gloves, real thin gloves, and possibly real thin socks as well. So, pardon me, it's the thinnest layer. Synthetics and merino wool are great materials to consider. And then what I would say is stay away from cotton. Cotton is not an insulator. Maybe maybe the fabric of our lives, but in the wintertime, it is not a good material for active pursuits because it won't move that moisture away. It'll absorb that moisture and it'll hold that cold, wet material next to your skin. The second system, the second layer in our system is your insulation layer. So this may be made up of several different layers, like a vest, like a fleece like this. It can be a few different thicknesses. It may be a puffy jacket or a down jacket. But again, the purpose of this is to retain your body heat and keep you warm. This is the layer that you may have 2, 3, maybe even more, depending on where you're going. But this is the real versatile layer. So you can add on, take off as needed. If you're getting too hot, or too cold, this is the layer that you keep putting a few more on or off, depending on what you need. Materials, again, good quality synthetics, merino wool, and down can also be really good insulators. Just an example here, I didn't realize how dirty some of my outdoor clothing is until I took a picture of it. So hopefully my mom's not watching this right now. And then our outer layer. So our outer layer is kind of our shield, right? So this is what's protecting us from the wind, rain, wet snow. And it doesn't even have to be snowing for you to kind of wet and get your layers wet. I mean, hiking through, a spruce grove with all the snow on it can, fall on you and get you wet. But also that wind, we really need to be careful of. So going left to right, there's a nylon jacket there, the real lightweight, inexpensive, very breathable. And then soft shell jackets, which would be that green one in the middle. Those are great because they're flexible, they move with you, stretchable. They're great for, like backcountry skiing or something like that. And then kind of the top shelf would be a Gore-Tex jacket or similar material, which is breathable and waterproof. But the main purpose of that outer layer is to protect you from the wind and protect you from wet environment. All right. So, and then a few other things too. This layering system works for our head, our feet, and our hands as well. And we already talked about that loss of heat through radiation. So, making sure you have a warm hat, a buff, neck gaiter, face mask, or a scarf. I also put balaclava, not baklava. As tasty as baklava may be, it's not something you want to be wearing on your face. And I made the mistake as a teenager going into a store saying, and I think I read one of Steve Smith's guidebooks from AMC, and it listed like one of those in the gear list. And I went to a store as a teenager and said, yeah, I need to find a baklava. The guy at the shop was just shaking his head like, no, that's not what you need at the store. So anyway, so balaclava is nice because it really covers up your face if need be, but you can pull it down and just cover your head. Those are great. And then sunglasses or ski goggles are some other good ones to help protect your face in real windy conditions. And again, this is versatile. You take on, put on what and take off what you need throughout your activity. And then same thing with your gloves and socks. Socks come in a wide range of thicknesses. So my suggestion is try it out with the type of boots that you're going to be using. You can layer them. You can have a real thin layer to kind of wick that moisture away, and then have like a mid-weight or a thicker weight sock. Same thing with the gloves and mittens. Start off with a thin layer, and then maybe have one or two thicker layers, depending on what you're doing. Mittens work best at heat retention because your fingers are together as one. So they're all working together to share that heat. When you have your fingers in a glove, you got better dexterity, but each digit has to work on its own to stay warm. So just wanted to throw a shout out to all the merino sheep out there. Thank you for making some of the finest outdoor clothing and fabrics out there. So the puns will continue. All right, so winter footwear. If anyone can guess what item probably shouldn't be in that lineup, but there's a lot of different wide range of different footwear out there that we can utilize depending on what we're doing. Your good old fashioned bean boots are great if you're just kind of kicking around some conservation land, going out for an hour or two with the kids or what have you. But there's limitations to each one. What I would say is if you're going to be going out for a longer hike, look at kind of the lighter weight winter hiking boots. They're much like your regular hiking boots, but they have a little bit of insulation in the boot. They're waterproof, and also the inserts typically will help retain body heat. So those are great. They're lightweight, pretty stiff, but not too bad. Mountaineering boots, completely different animal. Those are made for crampons, and your regular hiking boots can work just fine too. But again, check them, test them out before a hike with the socks, winter weight socks. You just want to make sure that your feet aren't constricted. Your toes, you don't want them getting cold. So there's a few things you can do to kind of modify your boots. You can get insulated foot beds to help retain some of that heat. And I would also, strongly suggest a waterproof, breathable boot. All right, so gaiters, not gaiters. One will help protect your leg. The other one will bite it off. Fortunately, we don't have too many gaiters here in New Hampshire that I'm aware of. But the other type of gaiter is a nice piece of equipment. It just, as you can tell from that picture, goes up to about your knee, helps seal out the snow, help retain some body heat as well. I use them year round. They're great early spring mud season hiking. They're great if you're going to be bushwhacking or concerns with ticks and things like that. So, once you get them, you'll probably find use for them year round. All right, and then traction devices. Pardon me. So snowshoes, and then below that picture of the snowshoes is microspikes. If you haven't used those before, they're not very expensive, but they just have these small little spikes on the bottom. So they'll fit around your boot and they'll give you really great traction in packed snow and ice. To the left of that are the crampons, and you can noticeably see the huge difference in the size of those spikes. I would say if you're going to use crampons, that's more mountaineering. You're probably going to need that if you go above tree line in the presidentials. But make sure you take some time practicing with them, get some training with those. You don't want to trip with those things stuck on your feet. Various different types of traction devices, they all have their use, they're all great. Sometimes, you know, one works better than the other, but they're all excellent. All right, and then a few other things. Pack cover for your backpack. You want to make sure that your backpack fits you well, is comfortable, puts most of the weight on your hips. And a pack cover, a lot of packs come with them. Not exactly necessary, but it'll certainly help keep the pack and contents dry. But you can also use heavy duty contractor bags, which is what I use. I just put 2 of those in my backpack, and there's a lot of other uses that you can use for emergencies and so forth with a heavy duty trash bag. Some of the safety equipment, what you see right there, and we'll go through kind of the checklist here, but the P cord is that bright rope right there. You know, you don't need anything too fancy, but a knife, a headlamp with extra batteries. Make sure that the batteries in the headlamp are fresh. The extra batteries that I put in the pack, I learned kind of the hard way once I could not find the 3rd battery. Somewhere it was rolling around in my backpack and I could not find it in the dark. So from now on, I've always just take some painter's tape or something and just wrap it around the batteries so they stay together until I need them. I like to have just a little mesh bag, a little ditty bag that I put everything in there for the winter, and I just keep it in the backpack. It just lives there for the winter time. But a few of the things that you'll see in that picture, some of those chemical hot hands are great. Zippo also makes one that just looks like a giant lighter. You can light that, and I've used that for winter fly fishing and hiking and you know, pond hockey, and it does a great job of giving off a lot of heat. Some type of lighter and some tinder, and then a space blanket is also really important. Just a nice piece of backup equipment. A few other things, some other considerations depending on where you're going, the type of hike you're going on, like how many people are going with you. But a few other things to consider: a med kit, radio, cell phone, a charger, paper map with, I would suggest, a trail description printed. You can also take pictures on your phone, but I think it's good that at least 1 or 2 people in that group have a paper map as a backup. Compass. You could also look at some of the GPS equipment. They're great. They're getting more and more accurate and more affordable. So depending again on where you're going, what type of terrain you're going in, it may be a consideration. I'd certainly have a whistle, possibly a small repair kit, and then another piece of equipment that's really nice and cheap. In fact, you probably already have it in your house, so the next time you go food shopping, you'll probably get it. Bread bags or those produce bags that you put your apples or oranges or whatever in. Those can be used when your hands or feet are really cold and wet. You can put your hand in there, heat pack it, and then put a thick sock or mitten over that, and that'll help retain all that body heat. So that's a real quick way to warm up your feet or hands, and the equipment's real cheap. So, all right, pardon me. So there's a saying in the outdoor education field of know before you go and know while you're on the go. So in general, do your homework before you go on a hike. If it's a new hike, if it's a new place, this is the time you can do this, months, weeks, even years before the hike, but do your homework, read up on it. Whether you're using a guidebook or an online app, I would say with any of the online sources, just take that with a grain of salt. Another thing you can do is talk to folks. Steve Smith and the Mountain Wanderer Bookshop up in Lincoln, or you could call the rec center here if you come up to Waterville Valley, or the Athletic Improvement Association. Find out who maintains those trails. Those are the people who are out there a lot. So you could talk to those folks and get some trail information. So use multiple resources. I think a guidebook and a map need to work together. You can get a lot of great information just looking at a map, but there's a lot in between those contour lines that you can't tell from a map. So that's where the guidebook comes in play. But also a guidebook can give you a lot of great information about like natural history, cultural history. There's a lot of really great things that you can do to enrich that your experience on that hike. But a guidebook and map work together. I'd watch the weather, some of the patterns, kind of watch the weather leading up to the hike. If you're going with a group, maybe even one person could be selected to, that's their job. They're going to monitor that weather and, you know, what's going on, and check that weather conditions, but know all that before you go on the hike and the day of. And like I said, you know, make sure you know what those road reports are, the weather reports are for your drive there. Statistically, in outdoor education programs, just the drive is statistically the most dangerous part of the activity. And then backup plans is a great idea to, you know, have plan B. If we get to the trailhead, or you know, you start out on the hike and the snow is too deep, or the weather conditions are just not working, then, you know, it's nice to have that backup plan. It's a little bit easier to convince yourself, yeah, you know what, this isn't working, but we know of another trail, we can do that. It's a little bit safer. So having a backup is a good idea. Even as important, maybe even more important really, is someone file a float plan. Make sure that someone back home knows where you're going, knows what your plans are, and have an established check-in time so that you can call or send a text message, what have you. They know what time you should be calling, and they also know what to do if you don't check in with them at a certain designated time. Who should they call? What should they report? Could save a life. So definitely have that backup plan, file that float plan with someone trusted at home. And then the wimp out factor. So anyone who goes on a hike with me is going to hear stories about my best friend, Big Mac. And he and I, as great friends as we are, we went to college for outdoor education together. And we're probably the worst people to go hiking in the wintertime together, because neither one of us wants to whip out in front of the other. So the whip out factor is, you know, don't try to prove anything. Know what your limitations are. Be realistic about the dangers and hazards that you're facing. Don't be so tied into a goal, and you know, make sure that you're not pushing your best friend, or he's pushing you into unsafe terrain or conditions. Few extra sources, shameless plug. If you haven't seen this guidebook, it's phenomenal. They did an amazing job on it, and it's half coffee table book with the incredible photos in there, natural history and historical history, but just a ton of great information for the hikes in this area. So again, good quality map that's recent, good guidebooks is invaluable. These are some other books that I highly recommend if you're getting into winter activities, no matter what they are. The AMC's Guide to Winter Hiking and Camping, Mountaineering, Freedom of the Hills. Now, that one is a big volume, but the first 10 chapters applies to anybody who wants to do, you know, any kind of activities in the outdoors. And then Alan and Mike's Backcountry Ski book. These are a series of books from two instructors from the National Outdoor Leadership School. And I love the book because it's all comics, so I can really understand it, but some really great information there. We'll make this available, but just some other resources, things that will help you with planning, and, you know, folks to talk to or email. I'm always happy to be a resource anytime you're coming up to the area, but also Steve Smith at the Mountain Wanderer Bookstore, the Waterville Valley Athletic Improvement Association, New Hampshire Fish and Game has a lot of great resources and information to get outdoors as well. White Mountain National Forest, their local offices in Campton, and they can give you a lot of information about what roads are closed and conditions on the trails. The New Hampshire Hike Safe Card, I think Tyson's going to talk about that later, but if not, we'll come back to it. And then the New England Mountain Club, and Appalachian Mountain Club. The New England Trail Conditions, that's an online source that you can look and find what some of the conditions are on the trails. Again, take it with a grain of salt, but it does have a lot of great information, and usually it's pretty up to date. And then Leave No Trace organization. So ways that you can educate yourself on how to get outdoors, but do it responsibly and do the best to conserve our natural resources. So I'll leave you with some inspiring photos. Hopefully you'll all get outdoors this winter, no matter what you do. Have a great time, have fun, and be safe. So with that, thank you for, sticking with me. You can wake up and now it's prime time, the big show with Tyson. So take away. Thank you again very much. All right.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Tough to top that. Thank you. Good lead in. I appreciate it. Let me do, let me see here. Share screen. This is the first time I've shared screen without somebody else doing it for me. So. All right, perfect. Thanks again, Eric. As people I mentioned earlier, my name is Tyson. I actually grew up kind of Belmont, Canterbury area. Spent some time in New York, Vermont, Alaska, all over the country, and ended up back in the region. Biggest reason is I love the woods, kind of the atmosphere of New England. So ended up back here. And a lot of my experience is based on outdoor recreation, like fishing, hunting, and how I've learned from that and try to teach others some of the safety features that come along with it, some important things to know as you venture outside. So to begin, I mentioned one of my favorite outdoor activities in the winter is ice fishing. So for example, this last weekend, I was out on Squam both Saturday and Sunday. Obviously, if you were outside, you would realize one day was a horrible blizzard, snow and rain. The other day was about 4 inches of water on the ice. So having a good understanding of the conditions out there and how to assess them is important to spend some time on the lakes within New Hampshire. Part of my position with the SLA, we monitor winter water quality. So throughout the season, there's, I believe, 13 sites across Big Squam and Little Squam, where our AmeriCorps interns will monitor the conditions of the lake. And leading up to that is teaching some ice safety to the interns as well. And some of them have never even been on a frozen water body before. So it's important to kind of set the ground rules before just kind of throw some skates on and hop out on the lake. So to begin, I'll just cover some basics of, it sounds general, but of ice in the region. Then identify some dangers of what changes the ice and some hidden threats. And then planning and equipment of before you would actually go onto the ice. The response if an accident does occur, and then actually getting it on the ice. And I'll follow this all up with some forward thinking of leading into the future of kind of wrapping everything up into one to understand how you can make an impact in the region. My intention with this presentation is not to teach everybody the details of how many inches of ice you can get on, walking, skiing, on a snowmobile. It's more of to kind of create the conscience in your mind that there's never safe ice. You should always be concerned about how the conditions will arise either in one location or others. I cringe driving by some certain locations and seeing somebody out ice skating where I know that I'm very, very detailed in checking the conditions and know that that might not be the case with other folks as well. So a great example is right around New Year's, 2 women were ice skating on a town pond in Canaan. That's just one example I pulled up. The police officer said that the woman mistook the open water for black ice, which you'll learn about in a little bit. And it just happened to be right place, right time. And the officer said that if he was not there when the skaters submerged, they might not have survived. So I'm not trying to scare you, but I want you to really think twice about the fact of, it's a dangerous activity to go on a lake, and just taking some basic precautions can really provide you some some advanced warning and some equipment to be able to navigate on the lakes in the winter. So some basics. How does ice form? And this might sound simple, but when there's no snow, you see the first skim on the lakes in the winter. The lake freezes, gets a skim coat of ice. From that point on, the ice is actually forming downward. And the actual lake level itself is remaining the same, but the ice is becoming thicker from the surface that you see down. Once we receive snow or a rain event, like kind of the other day, mixed snow rain event, that piles on top of that water level and can then build on top. So for example, snow, you then build a layer on top. So depending on the season, early winter, late winter, this year, not a lot of snow, can influence how the ice forms, whether there's a lot more snow and ice on top, or kind of a mix, or on the bottom, it's actually some hard ice that's forming throughout the lake. And a perfect example that I'll be describing throughout the presentation is kind of the generic term of white ice or black ice, or what's known as snow ice or clear ice. On top, for example, the snow ice is a lot more air bubbles in it. It's a lot more porous, kind of like a sponge, and is not as dense as black or clear ice, which doesn't have a lot of air bubbles. And I was on last week checking some conditions, and you could see right down through it, right down to the lake bed. So those are some terms I'm going to throw around kind of loosely throughout the presentation. If you ever research ice safety practices or ice conditions and other aspects, these are some terms that will definitely be thrown out as well. One of the biggest take homes with looking at these kind of two variables in ice conditions are white ice, or the snow ice, has half the strength of clear ice or black ice. And because it's porous, it cannot handle the weight of a person on it, any sort of activity like black or clear ice would, which almost looks like an ice cube from a tray in your freezer. So first I want to start off by identifying some dangers, including what changes the ice and some hidden threats. So now you have the benchmark of how the ice forms in the lake. Two main kind of types of ice that almost all guidelines are based off of, either clear ice or white ice, and then what actually changes that to from one to the other to what occurs. For example, in the beginning, kind of the strength and integrity of the ice is a big part of it. So in the water, some things that could change the ice include a spring, kind of some upwelling. This picture here in the bottom left is an example of, I was out on the ice right around Christmas time in a small pond where we had all that rain, and it looks like a small dark spot, but it kind of had some fingers coming off of it like it was shattered glass. And that was actually a spring coming up. You can see water bubbling up through the ice. So that's an example of something that can change the ice within the water body itself. Another major thing to be cognizant about are objects that retain heat, like rocks along a shoreline, dock pylons, moorings, even just a frozen mooring ball that's frozen in the ice, or vegetation, decomposing vegetation, or even things like cattails can give off heat, and that can actually allow the ice to not freeze as thick in situations like that. A great example is you go to climb on a local pond, and the edges, you kind of break through up to your shins or your ankles, but there's 2 feet of ice out in the middle. That's a great example of kind of the vegetation side of things. And then another thing is dock bubblers. So it's for landowners or shorefront owners that place bubblers near their docks to prevent freezing. Supposed to be signs posted, but that's something to be cognizant about as well. It thins not just the ice where you can see, but the ice that's formed actually becomes thinner as you go out further. And then things that actually change the ice going onto the water. This is a lot more prevalent in the springtime, where you have some shoreline runoff anywhere near maybe a drainage culvert, a stream that's an inlet, or kind of an access point like a launch or a snowmobile trail. If any of you have ever been to Meredith during the Rotary Ice Fishing Derby, congratulations, you have all 3 in one spot. So that's why you typically see that site on the news about once a year. So that's a great example of all these kind of concerns in one location. Not that it's not a reasonable spot to get on the ice, but these are just some things to be cognizant about as you access the ice. And then the weather. So the conditions the other day with the rain, I was on some ice a couple weeks ago where a river had actually received some rainwater upstream, raised the ice level, and then the water level went back down. And so all the edges of the water body had become fragmented, sometimes known as shelf ice. You can see down in the picture in the bottom right where it's all broken along the shoreline. And although there were, it was about 8 to 10 inches of ice out in the middle, the first 5 or 6 feet was open water. So that's one condition that can weaken or break the edges. A lot of snow can sink the ice and insulate it from freezing even further, not allowing a thick coating. Wind can break up the ice as well. For example, last week on Newfound Lake, there was a coating of ice down on the south end of the lake where fishermen were out for a good stretch. And then I went to check it the next day and it was all broken up from the wind coming down the lake. So, and the final note would be the season. So Eric had mentioned not just the duration of the sun during this time of year, but also the aspect. The sun can play a big role in on a bright day how it affects the surface of the ice within some water bodies as well. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some things to keep in the back of your mind. If one of these comes up down the road, you can at least hopefully rings a bell to maybe these are some things that might change the ice. Then some hidden threats. So this afternoon we had some snow squalls. If you had some thin ice conditions in a certain area, it might disguise that. And then some evidence of other uses. So a lot of the water bodies around here are a lot of people will use the ice for different activities. For example, fishing. Ice fishing holes can might not freeze all the way. Coated by the snow could be a danger to kind of poke your leg in. Or when spring thaw occurs, that hole might open up larger. Snowmobiling, I know down New Hampton on the Pemmy River, there's actually a snowmobile trail that travels the Pemmy River. So repeated access on and off a water body can weaken the ice. And skating, so just the casual activity of taking a four-wheeler and an ATV and plowing a path for a skating rink can alter the ice conditions, whether it freezes faster or slower based on snow cover or no snow cover, can also alter conditions. So a lot of these activities that occur on one water body can influence the conditions in immediate areas that you might not expect. And two major hidden threats that kind of fall off the back burner and everybody thinks it's all about the actual thickness of the ice. Some other threats are pets. So a lot of people actually become rescued from the ice due to a dog maybe running out on the ice and falling in, and then you try to rescue your dog and you fall in as well. And also inexperience. So a threat to going on the ice might be your inexperience of not knowing how to actually measure the ice or assess some other risks. Some common formations that as you spend some time on the ice, checking the ice conditions or even just looking out your window, you might notice. In the spring, one thing you'll really notice is candle ice, where you might have a foot of ice, but if you chip out a chunk and you drop it, it almost forms kind of candles or icicles. It's from the water permeating down through the ice and melting. That actually weakens the ice. So even though it's clear, it becomes weaker than it typically would be maybe a month earlier. You mentioned the picture Newfound from the other day, this jumble ice where that ice, there was fishermen on it the day before, wind broke it up and then it refroze kind of in those chunks, which is not a good sight to see people kind of going out on that as well. And then the picture I mentioned earlier as well, the white or snow ice and the kind of black or clear ice. Eric touched on some of the more detailed plans for an itinerary and equipment. I'm just going to touch on some things that might be altered or changed due to activities on the ice. One of the things I like to do throughout the season are maybe print off a kind of a screenshot or a Google map of a smaller area of where I'll be going, be fishing or out on the ice. Maybe just leave a sticky note on it. And this is where I'll be going. I'll be going on from this access point. A lake map is great, but trying to show somebody on a 3x5 map on your counter might be a little more difficult than a regular computer paper page and just kind of a sticky note. Either way works. Leaving that on the counter is a lot better than having a cell phone that dies and nobody really knows where you are. Expected time of return is very important as well. spending some time around the Squam watershed. A lot of the area does not have cell signal. So somebody doesn't hear from you. It could be kind of a traumatic experience for them. You're out on the ice, but in reality, your phone is dead, and you just haven't been able to reach them yet. And then passing your info along to other members, both within and without your group, family members, people that you commonly associate with doing these activities. Give them a ballpark of your itinerary. Like I said, Eric touched on the equipment. Reliable form of communication, including not just cell service, but cold weather conditions. Your battery dies on your phone, and that's your only form of communication. Planning ahead to ensure that you have some backup as well. And then some of the more specialized ice safety gear. It's pretty minimal based on cost and availability. A big one is a chisel or a spud. So a ski pole or a trekking pole is not adequate to test the ice. You need a good weighted spud or a chisel to be able to really slam it onto the ice and know body weight, can withstand the amount of ice in front of you. A measuring device, even if you take a drill or an auger or a chisel and get through the ice, understanding what the ice looks like. So either a scoop or a tape measurer to understand thickness. It's some safety picks. So picture here on the right are 3 different types of safety picks I have. On the left, kind of shields the point on a safety pick. The middle, they clip together and goes around your neck. And on the right, there's a long rope that can go around your neck into your pockets, but also kind of shields the pick as well. And then in addition, a personal flotation device and some traction for your feet to prevent slipping. So the next step will be accident response, both what happens if you fall through the ice or if somebody else. Now, this is universal across the board through different state and federal agencies, different outdoor recreation groups. Biggest thing is if you fall through is not to panic. The place that you came from before you fell in was safe enough that you were able to navigate across that. So your goal is to get back to that spot. So to get back there, laying on your belly, kicking your feet, and trying to get yourself back up onto the ice. This is a perfect example of when your ice picks can come in handy. You see the picture in the bottom with this person is actually using the ice picks to pull themselves up on the ice. The 2 women that had fallen through in the previous article, they kicked their feet, they stuck their arms up on the ice, and their clothing began to freeze to the ice surface until rescuers could pull them out. So that's a great method as well. Then roll and create a lot of surface area until you can get away from where you had fallen in the ice. But then if you are witnessing somebody else in this situation, there's a couple different methods to use to prevent yourself from ending up in the same way they are as well. First step is to call 911. Get that phone call going and get the response moving before you can actually try to help. I guess don't create 2 rescues. Stay off the ice where the person fell through, and try to avoid a second rescue in the same situation. A good method to remember is reach, throw, or row. So reach with a branch or something long to try to pull them out, have them grab onto it and pull out of the ice. If you can't, throw a rope or some sort of flotation device. If you can't, row. So find some sort of, if there's a canoe or a boat nearby, maybe row to the open water. And these are getting down to the line of kind of some last resort options to be able to get somebody out, but they are helpful thoughts to keep in the back of your mind of options to be able to help somebody, get out of the ice. And the biggest thing throughout all this is encourage a person to kick and reach. I mentioned that article where the skaters fell through. It's a perfect example of how that worked right here in New Hampshire about 2 weeks ago. This is a good example of a bunch of different ice thickness charts that have kind of been compiled and what we're using at the SLA. Mentioned using a spud or a heavy chisel and measuring the ice and hitting the ice hard on your way out. The goal is to check the ice as you go out further, not just by hitting it with a spud, but drilling a hole and measuring the thickness and understanding what the ice makeup is, white ice, dark ice, things like that. This time of year, you have some conditions, for example, on the northern end of Squam. I was out on Saturday, had about 8 inches. About a mile down the lake had about 3 or 4 inches. So it's important not just to worry about one area, but check as you go as well. and just forward thinking into the future. When I go to check the ice for our water quality monitoring or for ice fishing, the supplies I carry on the right. I have a life jacket, I have a scoop, which on the scoop itself actually has increments for measurement to be able to understand how thick the ice is, heavy weighted chisel, some ice cleats on the bottom left, and then some safety picks on the right. So you can build your own safety kit. These basic supplies for yourself going on the ice, whether you're skating or even a rescue kit. Keeping a throwable flotation device with a rope down by your dock. So if somebody does go in and you're maybe a shorefront owner, property owner, you could have that available. Many frozen water bodies become locations for shared use. So it's pretty interesting to drive along the shore of the lake, and maybe on one cove you see a windsurfer, then you see somebody ice fishing, then you see a snowmobile access point onto the water body. So recognizing that these different shared uses can impact the water body differently and the ice conditions differently. And remember that you are sharing the water body. It's almost the same idea of in the summer. You know, if you're in a motorboat and there's a canoe nearby, it's a shared outdoor winter activity. And early on, I mentioned the fact that certain situations I drive by and maybe cringe based on somebody out there, and not the fact that I don't trust their judgment, but the fact of I don't believe somebody maybe has a good understanding of how to monitor the ice conditions. So I think everybody that at least learned the basic steps from this presentation and from other material online can do their part to at least, if anything, make somebody second guess or cause yourself to second guess the conditions, to take that extra step to measure the ice and get a better understanding of the conditions, whether it's windsurfing, skating, snow machine, ice fishing, skiing, and any activity. And then a great line that New Hampshire Fishing Game has recently started using is based on the ice thickness is thick and blue, tried and true, and thin and crispy, way too risky. With that, Eric mentioned one more thing I'd like to touch on real quick is the hike safeguards. If you purchase a fishing license, a OHRV registration, you are covered under the hike safeguard program. If you do not, you can purchase that card separately. And what that is, it's kind of a somewhat of an insurance policy, minus the negligence. So if you have a mistake, an injury out in the wilderness or on a lake, and you have to be rescued, kind of provide some reinsurance that you've kind of contributed your part towards the program that would allow that rescue. But it does not account for negligence in certain situations. So if you want, Eric wants to touch on that more as well, feel free, but give you a background on it. It's a great program, and I encourage you, if you do not have any sort of other license or registration in New Hampshire, it's definitely worth the small amount. So I'm going to exit my screen share and pass it on to Leanne, and hopefully we can make this work and we can do some questions.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks, Eric. There were a few questions that came up. One person was curious what a spud is, Tyson.
That's a lot of times you can find kind of an old chisel or a pry bar in the corner of a shed or a garage. It's just a really weighted, almost pry bar. Sometimes they're 4 to 5 feet long, and it's heavy to pick up. I guess the variation is you would not want to use that trekking as a trekking pole, and it's something good and weighted that you can really heave into the ice. On the other hand, chisels, ice chisels and ice picks, any sort of fishing outdoor supply store will supply those. I encourage you to buy them local versus shipping because they are heavy, so they do cost a lot in shipping. But there's some local stores as well that do have those, and we recently purchased a new one at the SLA for our ice safety program.
And then Eric, there was a question during your presentation about the difference between a soft shell and a hard shell. I'm guessing.
Yeah. So the difference in the material, the soft shell is not, or most soft shells are not waterproof. So they're pretty water resistant. the nice thing about that is that there's panels, the material itself is stretchable, and it breathes really well. So in activities like ice climbing, backcountry skiing, where you need some more flexibility, those are really nice. Where you might be, above tree line in the wintertime, you may want to really look at like a Gore-Tex or similar material, just because those are more windproof and waterproof. So those, if you get into some real serious wind or wet conditions above tree line, those are going to be a better choice.
So those are the only two questions that were in the chat. If there are folks who are still on right now who have questions, we welcome those. So if anyone, feel free to unmute yourself. You can ask it, or if you want to type it into the chat, now it would be the chance to get your questions answered. And if there are no more questions, I am going to compile some of those links and resources that were mentioned during the presentation, and I will share those to everyone who is here tonight, as well as, and then I will also send out the recording as well. And that'll all be posted on the SLA website as well. And I'll share that with Warren, and he can share with the WVAIA community. So
one question for Eric. Just so Eric, with the hikes, the winter hikes that the rec department's doing, I know that is there an online class that you then ask people to attend before they can attend your hikes?
No, not necessarily. So we have like off-trail guided snowshoe hikes on Sundays. So the first one in the morning, that's really great for anyone who's never been snowshoeing or just getting into it. And then the afternoon, we go out for a little bit longer, a little bit more challenging terrain. So that's great for folks who have done it a few times and just want to challenge themselves a little bit more. And then on Saturdays, we're doing what we're calling winter guided hikes, because most of those we're going to a summit. It's at least a half-day hike, if not a full-day hike. And most of those are going to, a summit. So the online class is great if you have not done winter hiking or snowshoeing before. It's a lot of what we went over tonight, but more in depth and some things about cold weather injuries. It's not a certification class. It's a good general overview, but we do go into more depth, and it just gives you a good idea of what to expect and what to bring with you on a guided hike. So, but yeah, if you're interested, give me a phone call or email, and if you're interested in the online class, we can help you with that as well. But we've got a few different offerings.
Cool, thanks.
Eric, there's a question. Someone asked, what's a good hike to try snowshoeing in the valley for beginners?
Yeah, so Smarts Brook, just before you get into Waterville Valley, is a great one. There's various loops, Yellow Jacket and Smarts Brook and Tri-Town. So there's some nice loops there. Another nice thing about it is that it's very popular. So there's other people out there. If you're a little bit hesitant about going out, but those trails are very easy to navigate. In the valley here, so just going out for a few hours, you could park at Livermore, and there's little loops that you could do, like Boulder Path, or you go up to Goodrich Rock or something like that. So there's some nice terrain that's fairly flat. The Scour or something like that could also be another nice one, where you get some elevation, you get some really nice views, but it's not a full day undertaking. So that could be another good option.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eric and Tyson, so much for sharing all of your expertise. And I hope folks get out and enjoy winter adventures. Check out the SLA website, Waterville Valley Recreation website. There's lots of great programs happening. both virtual and in person. So check that out, and we hope to see you all soon again, maybe at another one of this presentations in this series or a different program. So everyone have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.